All right, everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel Gleitman. I am the Educational Implementation Specialist here at SAM Labs. We are excited to host and have one of our webinars ending up the 2021 year. And we're excited to have Victor, Coach Hicks, join us today. He currently is a teacher in Atlanta, Georgia at St. Thomas More Catholic School. He's taught for over 6 years in computer science technology and has over 20 years of educational experience from his hometown of Chicago, Illinois. We are excited for him to join us today as he shares his experiences and how he uses his talents to provide culturally relevant computer science experiences for K through 12 students. Coach Hicks is actually a recent recipient of the Teacher Excellence Award for Georgia CSTA. Coach Hicks, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your background as an educator and your experience in education.
Okay, so I actually finished up at Clark Atlanta, which is the HBCU here in Atlanta, which is how I ended up in Georgia, with plans on being a physical education teacher. So it's where the coach initially came from, and Coach Hicks did teach PE for a little bit, and along with everything else under the sun, high school, elementary, reading interventionalist, just you name it. Actually, about 7 years ago now, was ready to leave Chicago, come someplace a little bit warmer all the time, and was actually out on a choreography gig and met a really amazing principal here in Atlanta. And she's like, oh, my kids just really, have taken to you. Is there some way that we can get you to come, take a job in Georgia and Atlanta? And so I'm kind of like, well, sure, I'll call your bluff on that. I said, when you get a job, and I'll be there. I said, you give me a contract. So I think that year APS started August 3rd, and I'd signed my contract and planning on staying in Chicago that school year. And August 1st, I got a phone call. And
wow.
Like, hey,
the quick transition.
Yes. And so on August 2nd, I packed up, and August 3rd, I became a computer science teacher. So,
wow.
I had a little bit of family background. My dad's a computer engineer, and has been for a while. And, but kind of really learned, as in the moment, building the plane while I'm flying it. And I would say it's probably one of the reasons that computer science has become my passion above all, even probably having maybe not the smallest, but one of the shortest amount of time so far teaching it, because I really had to learn. I think it's one of the few, subject matters where teachers really have to be lifelong learners with their kids. As cliche as that phrase is, and as much as we know that it benefits our kids, I think computer science is one of those areas where you got to kind of have to talk the talk, because as soon as you know it, it changes. Even just in some of the trends that or subjects that we touch on with children in K through 12. So it's really, I would say it's probably been the most fulfilling period, as an educator. And so, here I am.
Well, that's, as you've learned, it sounds like, going from August 2nd or 1st to getting the job to starting August 3rd, you've had to learn a lot along the way. So absolutely. How has that impacted you as far as what you're teaching in professionally in computer science? How has that impacted you in the fact of thinking, oh, if I was this age as a student, I wish I had known this? What does that look like as far as your impact, as far as in teaching?
I think it really has, I would probably say been the most impactful positively. Time is just, in shaping good practices as an educator for just that reason. Because it did kind of force me to put myself in those shoes of a student, and, and walking into a classroom, and feeling, vulnerable, as much as we tell kids that, hey, try your best. And, it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. It's very different, in your 30s, and when you're standing in front of a group of 10-year-olds who in many cases, at that point know more than, I did in computer science. But I think if I had to take like one golden nugget away from it, it really taught me the importance of building that student rapport first and building those relationships. And, as much as it may seem, as easy as it is as educators to get caught up in the scope and sequence and the pacing calendars that math, science, social studies, PE, computer science, world languages, you have to build those student relationships first. Because what I realized is that, again, when you don't, and again, it was, I think, as a teacher, having the support of my colleagues, but also knowing I had the, the accountability of knowing these kids were depending on me to get it. But of course, in a child's world, that's not part of their thought process. So they do have to have a safe space. They do have, and they will learn from people who they trust, and I think with computer science, the biggest way to learn is to know, to make mistakes, to learn what you don't know. And I think in order for that to happen organically and, really to the best of the student benefit, you have to build those relationships. And that lesson definitely was taught these last, the first few years, especially of teaching computer science.
Oh, absolutely. I believe it. I mean, just it's the foundation in order for any teaching to be able to take to launch off of. So as you're thinking about, the foundation of kids and that relationships, are there particular skills too that you, as you've thought about your kids, whether or not they become computer science engineers, these are some of the foundational skills that I really want to impart with them?
Yeah, I would say definitely when we talk about content related, I think just kind of the general concepts, you want kids to think algorithmically. Sequencing is important, but again, those are transferable skills, right? Being able to take solve a problem one step at a time, or looking at a problem one step at a time. Attention to detail, which I think, sequencing, teaches kids that, but also, just, automation and looking for patterns and thinking about efficiency. Some of the more abstract concepts of computer science. And I think too, with this generation of kids, and I think especially coming after the, after the pandemic, one of the major skills that I would say the kids take away from computer science, or just, computational thought exercises, period, is the perseverance and problem solving. These kids, not to use the coin phrase, these kids, but, I think part of our generation, part of these children, the impact of COVID, and, I think just the society we live in, so much of it is becoming this, we can get information rapidly, answers can come quick, we can Google, we can, YouTube and find out how to do it. So I think really being deliberate about teaching and practicing perseverance is a transferable skill. So, I would love all of my children to make lots and lots of money as computer scientists, but I would definitely want to make sure that they understand more so, I guess, the general principles of computational thinking versus, because I think those things, even the kids that need to learn, who do decide to go into computer science, who need to learn the loops and the functions and the variables, that core piece of that perseverance is important, because we also lose a lot, between kind of the gamification of computer science early on. And then that transitioned into the 6 through 12 realm, where now we're asking them to type out these, this complicated syntax. So again, the common denominator there is the perseverance. So now, okay, you learn what it means to make mistakes and keep going. So whether we're presenting Java or C++ or Python, or, maybe you're in that space where you're transitioning from block into text, but it's very important to me that my students understand the problem solving skills, and then also that the perseverance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You touched on, the pandemic, and of course that has shifted a lot of aspects in education. And what are you hopeful for as far as educators adapting to continue to support their students? I know there is some intimidation with teaching computer science, and we'll touch on that a little bit in a second. But what is your hope as far as with the pandemic shift in education, as far as how could teachers continue to support their students through that?
I just think that the pandemic really allowed us, and really just trying to look at it from the positive perspective. Because I think, we've had so many things of talking about, student law or learning loss and things like that. But, one of the things that I saw in many of my students, and I think that's one of the reasons I love teaching the electives, specials world, is because kids are really able to learn a little bit more organically. It's, of course, we have data, of course, we make, those data-driven decisions, but our kids really get to kind of learn in the moment. And I think that I would love to see teachers continue the creativity they displayed when assessing students during the pandemic, continue the creativity in allowing students to find, success in many different levels. I love the attention. I think a lot of teachers were doing, universal design learning without even realizing they were doing it, it was interesting. I sat in a workshop with the Smithsonian, and they're like, "Oh, this UDL," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I did that," and oh, okay, So I really think I hope teachers continue to realize that, some of the best advice my mom gave me, veteran teacher of 32 years, like, close your door and do what's best for the kids. I think we have to learn how to tune out a lot of the non-education world, whether it be media or, whomever, that are telling teachers, that all these different things are going on, and understand that we are the experts. And, a lot of the things that we've done, we're continuing to do right. A lot of students who did not do well in a day-to-day in-person environment, I know I could definitely speak for some of my babies and say they exceeded expectations, because once they had that ability to step out of the distraction of sometimes that they couldn't manage, but that's awesome. And I think there's merit in that. And I think that wasn't just happening in my classroom, it was happening in thousands of classrooms virtually across the world. So I hope teachers continue to realize they're doing a fantastic job. That it's not going to be, one vision of success for us as educators. It's not going to be one vision of success for our kids, or even from computer science into social studies or into math, or from fourth grade into fifth grade. And I think just really, I'm hopeful that we continue to push towards kind of the new world of education that I think we were tiptoeing towards at the beginning-ish of the pandemic. But I hope that we start to make more moves in that direction, because I think a lot of the things, some of the practices and creativity that we were doing during the pandemic will help kids succeed as well. So.
Absolutely. We've seen some of the aspects excel in ways that we didn't think would happen for a long time in education. And so coming in, you have not only done this so in your classroom, but you have expanded and launched Coding with Culture. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So speaking to the student success, actually one of the young men that I was thinking about, one of my fourth graders, we were going through our virtual computer science lesson, really tried to make it more project-based. I think that was one positive takeaway as far as, my pedagogy that improved, because I said, okay, well, I got to figure out how to get my kids, many different access points, so again, if, something is happening at home, or, they're unable to get on, or internet is an issue, or, how can we not lose them? So again, that calendar, linear scope and sequence wasn't working, because, I might see a kid one day. I had some kids I was seeing every day, some I might see. I said, okay, we do this project, and all that to say, a couple of my students really, really started to, kind of flourish. And I love all things HBCUs, as anyone who follows me on social media knows. So I say, hey, okay, we're going to try this. We're going to, do this, build an HBCU project. We'll have some kids code, some kids will be building the website, we'll have graphic design. And I'm like, hey, these kids, the kids were, the things these fourth and sixth graders were coming up with was really, really phenomenal. And I'm like, hey, now that I have this market, parents are looking for things to do, the world had kind of shut down, there weren't after school programs. And I'm like, well, I'm finding success with this group of students. And the virtual space is, motivating so many kids that really, in the classroom, it was night and day. And I'm like, well, while we have this, how can we flip this and make this a positive to impact even more kids? So I said, well, I'm home on Zoom anyway. So, knew a lot of friends that were HBCU grads. And I said, well, they were kind of looking for something for their kids to do. And I'm like, well, now they finally can be in my class, because, we're not really bound by, districts and, at this point, the world. And that's kind of how it started. Had a couple, I think we started that summer of 2020. We had a couple classes, and the, response was good with the little ones. Same with middle school. We did a couple high school classes, and yeah, but I love it because, again, it's very still in its beginning phases. So I'm able to do a lot of one-on-one attention. I think really get some kids some solid foundations in some computer science skills, which is awesome. So yeah, it's been great. One of those kind of unexpected treats from the pandemic.
There you go. The rainbow in the storm, right?
Right, there you go.
As you've been working, you said, with the littles and the elementary students, have you noticed a shift, anything from working with, let's say, third graders pre-pandemic and then after pandemic, having a year of working with them? What kind of things did you notice as far as growth and a challenge, or let's say challenges and growth that you noticed from them?
Okay, so I would say definitely with the growth, my kids across the board, and I would say, younger all the way up to middle school, they definitely are thinking a lot more creatively. And I will say that. So, we were speaking a little bit at the beginning about the Shark Tank project. I'm seeing a lot more open thought, where kids are not as afraid to, try new things or, challenges. I would just say, and I don't really think it's a challenge. I just think as teachers, again, because we're the professionals that are in the business of children. One of the things I had to change to kind of, meet my kids where they were, was to, again, challenge the definition of my expectation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So again, really looking for a way of like, okay, hey, this is what following directions or meeting a goal or completing a task looks like, and so now that had to, whether it be my, wording in the setting the expectation or, redirecting if that expectation is not being met, like a lot of that resiliency was gone, but I think it's a good thing because it really kind of made me, as again, we talk about, being reflective as an educator, kind of say, okay, well, hey, Vic, was some of the stuff that we know it wasn't necessarily harmful to children, but were you really making sure that each kid had, this access to success, and not just necessarily academically, but even in the classroom. So when we talk about the, modeling students, how are you making sure that everybody's finding some room? I mean, it took a lot of creativity, but,
Yeah.
I think it was good because a lot of the things that we took for granted, day by day, just, kind of in the routine of going to school every day before the shutdown, it kind of made us be more mindful about it. So I was just saying our kids need a little bit, it wasn't that kind of one size fits all. It really kind of pushed you into really reflecting and, okay, how are we differentiating not only in instruction, but just in, in classroom community, so that these kids are feeling reconnected to, who we are as a classroom and then what we're doing. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's wonderful what you're doing, not only in your classroom, but in your school. So what do you think as far as views on computer science in your district and state and on a national level? Do you think it's growing in as much as you hoped it to be, or what are your thoughts there?
I think I would say yes. Yeah, yes and no. Definitely glows as far as computer science. I think, I would be remiss if I didn't say it's grown exponentially, which is huge. I think that is awesome. But again, just in kind of now being, a veteran, so to speak, in the
absolutely.
game, you start to see like, okay, well, some of these things really, really worked. I love them. I think a lot of things that I loved about the first kind of wave of like Hour of Code is like, it was all these great things. And I did them because I'm like, my kids are doing them, they're engaged. Well, once I found that first group of kids matriculated through elementary, and, now we're in 6th, 7th grade, we're, choosing our electives, but now computer science stops becoming gamified. So now there are no more Angry Birds. There are no more, Star Wars. It's like, okay, open up this, open set, we're going to start typing in. So I had this really robust group of kids that we're leaving 5th grade, like, oh, computer coding. And then I would go to the middle school and I'm like, so no one's, nobody, but I think I would love to see more of a connection between the K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12. I guess, I don't know if scope and sequence is the right word for that, but I just think really some more, and I guess that would have to be like kind of handled with lace gloves, because we don't want to overcomplicate it so that we are, leaving kids out of that K-5 window. But I think trying to find ways of giving them more of a realistic picture of what's to come.
No, absolutely.
I do also say I like the fact that you are starting to see a lot of schools that are taking computer science past coding, which I think is another important thing. One of the things I noticed with the pandemic, and again, just kind of really, fleshing out that pandemic, the universal design learning with a lot of those project-based units, was that some of my kids who had the strongest contributions weren't coding at all. It was important that they had that computational thinking foundation, that computational or how to kind of understanding of that as a problem solving technique. But my creatives many times in their groups were just that. They knew that when they came up with these ideas, it kind of had to tie into, because they knew the people that were dealing with the mechanics or the coding or the actual, that piece had something to work with. But I think it's very important that as we, look to close the digital divide and, increase the presence of, people of color and women in computer science, realizing that, coding is not, the way that technology is moving, so much of the actual coding is going to be automated anyway, with the artificial intelligence, machine learning growth that we're seeing. So we're just going to need really, I would love to see more districts start to use semantics wise, computational thought, problem solving versus just coding. Because I think coding, as much as I love it, that's clearly with coding with culture, but, I think sometimes that can be inhibitive, because we have to be realistic that, or just be real with ourselves and realize a lot of kids will love computer science if they realize that it's not just, syntax and actually typing out the code. So I think, we're heading in the right direction. And I think too, as we're heading in that direction, we're seeing the necessary growth, right? But just like the content of computer science is ever changing, I think so will it as a genre, I guess, in itself. So mindful, definitely happy and mindful and hopeful that it will continue to grow.
Absolutely. Well, seeing all that you have done, it's very inspiring, and seeing,
thank you,
coding with culture, or seeing what you've done on Twitter, but not only, as you've mentioned, with coding, but also beyond the classroom and what students are, even if they're not coding, that computational thinking and that creativity. Seeing that from an outsider is exciting. How do you suggest, as educators who see this and it's, I want to get to there, but where do I even start? How do I even begin? There's that intimidation factor. What do you recommend?
Call me. No, I was kidding.
His number will be in the chat.
Right. We'll go ahead and make that available for everyone. But I really say, as computer science even if you're looking to, include it in your classroom, find something that you're passionate about, because then it really helps you know what I'm saying, kind of go through it. So I knew HBCUs were my thing. So, a lot of our PBL units, because I could speak to the content easily. So as I was learning alongside the kids with, a lot of the computer science my first few years, I knew the content. So I knew what to give them. Like when we did the building of an HBCU campus, which, pulled in so many different things of stream, so many things I wasn't familiar with. And I told kids, I said, Mr. Hicks is kind of the content expert. And once they felt, again, we had that environment laid out, the kids will run with a lot of it, as far as like takeaways, getting it into your classroom, I would say one of the biggest tools for me that was very, very helpful, especially on the K-5 level, was just incorporating code.org as centers. I think it does a really, really good job of teaching a lot of the skills that kids need before we just kind of send them off and start asking for these more independent-based projects. And they do a really, really good job of it not being teacher-led, right? So your kids, whether they're working with each other or just even the instructional videos, but also cautioning to continue to allow your program to grow past that. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of simple tutorials in Scratch that allow for a lot of more open-ended building. But again, tied into something that you feel comfortable, and don't feel like you have to create this large, because it's definitely been a labor of love over these last 6 years. What I was doing in year one, I'm sure, if I looked at it now in year 6 and 7, I'm like, that was it, but it was me getting comfortable, but again, kind of building that. And as a teacher, it's never going to get easier. So I just always say, find your comfort level. The great part is from 6 years ago to now, there's so many different tutorials, and there's, these mini lessons that a lot of these, the coding curriculum companies have created that are specific to the subject, which I think is golden, because the reality is a lot of times it is a social studies teacher that's passionate about technology, or a science teacher, or a math teacher. And, we just want the kids exposed, again, that computational thought. And I think it's beneficial when it's not just the computer science teacher saying, okay, we got to do this. They already know we're crazy about it, right? So they know that we're going to say that in the way that many teachers do about their discipline. So I just think, don't be afraid to, dip your toe in the water, or, if you're the kind of, like with me, when you had to move to Atlanta, Georgia the day before you started teaching, cannonball on in, and
there you go.
The great part about, computational thought, problem solving, computer science stream is that your kids really learn as much from you, seeing you go through the process and not being the expert on all things than we realize. So I just think
go ahead.
I was just saying, no, the best, I think if I had to give like a one sentence piece of advice, just go for it.
Dive in. You've mentioned a lot about computational thought. Tell how you cultivate that and foster that in with your students, no matter if it's at the high school level, the middle school level, or the elementary. What does that look like for those grade levels, or is it the same wide span? Or talk a little bit more about computational thought.
Well, what I've kind of done a little bit with the computational thought is really using it, and I'll try to explain it so it makes sense, but like really using that as my community builder, like not like community, but like activity, like just as like those first few weeks, like first 6 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks of school, and just kind of understanding what problem solving looks like, so as we're talking about, of course, the younger ones a little bit more, defined point by point. But what does it look like when you don't understand? And what are the different, because we know that raising a hand as much as we want to will wipe out 70% of the kids from participating at all, but in that you start to also teach, or at least, I've started to leak or get in some of those steps. So again, when we decompose a problem and modeling that in a very non-risk environment, while we're still building the teamwork and the trust and what does my teacher expect from this? Kind of, again, those weeks we're kind of building intentionally that classroom community. I think that the golden piece for all grade levels, is that is to kind of don't feel pressure to rush into content. Because if not, and I realized that, so what happened was computational thought as a process, as a behavior, as a mindset, started to happen a lot more naturally once I needed it to. So if I, took those first 2 weeks, and we might have been doing projects that, really didn't have a lot of, risk as far as them continuing on and being on, prepared for the next levels, but then they were ready to really think computationally. So I wasn't constantly stopping after, project after lesson after project to say, okay, wait a minute, you're not trying your hardest. Or, are you really breaking the program? Are you looking for patterns? We did that with very simple, almost kind of no thought, tasks, so that we were really built, working those brain muscles out to become problem solvers. And again, so when you looked at a problem, it became like muscle memory for them. And I think that has proven beneficial from kindergarten, and believe it or not, I would say within the realm of computer science and stream, even more so with the big kids, because when we also started talking about middle school and high school, we're now talking about self-esteem and feeling self-conscious. And, the little boy or girl I call myself liking is in my class. So I can't, I can't ask Coach Hicks, but, we've spent 2 weeks talking about, how we support that, if you need, how you can write. I mean, I have so many contraptions in my room for children to write down problems. But I think that's why I'm able to get the results, I am when I need to, and why my kids naturally, and I mean, I'm not saying they don't have their middle and high school issues outside of, my classroom, but when you ask kids to make mistakes as a practice, then I think you have to kind of be intentional with that. So I do a lot of the teaching of computational thought as we're kind of building the foundation of what our computer science or STEAM class will look like, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. You mentioned a lot about how you provide different aspects and ways to support your students for them to ask questions. where do you find as an educator that you find your support and who you look to for your cohort and your professional learning network? Where do you reach out to people to support you?
I was going to say social media, a lot of our professional learning networks via, I mean, if done right. And I'll say that, and that was one of the things I had to be very intentional about, because it's a very thin line between, having people that kind of, where iron sharpens iron, and, you can kind of have realistic and, open discussions about what's happening in your classroom, what's not, what works, what didn't. I've really, really gotten some golden advice, just networking opportunities. But I think it's, I'd be remiss to not mention that you also have to be careful with that, because also social media presents this very unrealistic world of education, and even as a veteran teacher, I found myself many times like, well, I don't have, my room is not perfectly coordinated. I don't have the, perfectly matchy, but I could leave at the end of each day and know that my kids were learning. And I think finding that PLN of people, like-minded people who find value in the same things is golden. Because, like I said, some days this job, it does, it will beat you down to your last, but I think having people who are, realistic, but also find ways to say, well, hey, this was a win for you today, or, let's talk about what you did right, or, hey, this is what I tried with my kids and it worked. And that has proven to be beyond valuable. And I met you guys. So.
That works. So we met you. That's our treat. Tell us about with CSTA in Georgia. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention you won the Teacher Excellence Award through the Georgia CSTA. Tell us a little bit about your award and some of those achievements through the organization.
So it actually was interesting. My old principal was like, well, hey, Hicks, you gotta, because I'm like, I'm so not, like, one of the things I would say my biggest dislikes is writing bios about myself. Like my kids, my class website is like about Coach Hicks, and my middle school's like, you don't have anything there. And I'm like, I need y'all to write it. Because I mean, it's always feel like, I guess, it's not being humble. And I'm like, why do you do all these things? And you should tell people. And I'm like, okay. So, my principal was like, hey, I really think you should do this. And then I did, not realizing she had already done it, but I guess they needed to make sure that I, knew. So I just, kind of said, I'll go ahead and CSTA really, I think one of the reasons I was not as reluctant as usual is because in my time there, it is really, really their PDs. I think, just our professional networking at the state level, nationally, it's really people that are about kids, and I think like every teacher presentation I've been to, I think I've been to 2 of their national conferences now. Both have been virtual since I've been a member, but, I felt like every presentation was given or topics were chosen or, you could tell it was about kids. And it wasn't about, let me kind of come in and, it was like, hey, this is what I did in my class. And, so once I kind of came in, I said, okay, well, these are teachers that, think like I do. And yes, it has really, really just been even outside of the award, just a pleasant and beneficial networking experience. Because I mean, not only just the fact that we all teach, well, many of us don't teach computer science. You have a lot of people who are really just technical, tech savvy teachers, or teachers who are looking for ways to incorporate technology more. So it really just is a very diverse community. And I think, everybody doesn't mind pitching in and helping the next person. So, to be recognized by an organization like that, I think was huge.
Well, it's an incredible award, and truly it's, you definitely deserve an award like that for all that you do with your students. It is evident that everything you talk about, your students are number one, their priority, your priority. Tell us, the general question, teaching, what is your favorite part about teaching computer science?
My favorite part about teaching computer science, I think, is, and I have to say, because I think they're tied. So I would say definitely one, just seeing student creativity. Kids, I think my children who are not, the best test takers, or, when it's kind of the, right or wrong, they may struggle, but to really see their growth. I mean, and the things that when you allow kids, these kind of open-ended projects and assignments, just, their thought process. I mean, and the genius that exists, behind, so many of these, or within so many of these children. And I think my second point, second favorite part about teaching computer science is, and I guess it's kind of tied, is the student voice that it provides. I have kids who, it's funny to, and their homeroom teachers will come and pick them up and they're like, she talks? Like, our kids are fourth graders today. They're doing this. They're actually, while middle school is doing their Shark Tanks, they're doing a design a Disney theme park. So we're doing the whole kind of going through the Disney Imagineer curriculum and tying in some graphs and some stuff they're doing in math. And, a kid who, and she's, again, one of my very, very, anxious kids, everything had, and really just kind of, as school has gotten harder, kind of, we started to see her shrink a little bit more because, I mean, she's a great student, but very hard on herself about being right. And so she, does exactly what I asked her to do in my classroom, but not a big conversation kid. Like, she's the one that's like, here's my work. Okay, thank you. Good. But I mean, we had literally a 15-minute conversation and she's like, I did this, Coach Hicks, and did you know that the Imagineers? I mean, it was beautiful. This was unprompted. It wasn't but you could tell all this was building up, and she was so excited. And so, and I think those kind of opportunities are golden. I think that's, if anything has kept me going, if not all 20 years, but definitely these 6, it's just really seeing the voice that computer science gives kids. Like I said, the amount of creativity these kids can produce when given the tools and the opportunity. It's amazing. It is really amazing.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I want to ask one more question. We were talking about it a little bit as we began the webinar, but we would love to hear about either the Shark Tank project or one of your favorite projects that you got to see the integration of computer science and coding and seeing those kids apply those skills that that will be impactful outside of the classroom. We would love for you to share about one of the projects, whether it's the Shark Tank one or another one.
Okay, so one of the projects and I can speak to the Shark, since we are in the midst of these presentations are coming.
You can share both.
But I think the Shark Tank, one of the things, so kind of to give you the gist of it, the kids pretty much, it's based on the TV show. So that's kind of the big, takeaway. That's what they come back. They present this 3 to 5 minute pitch speech. I do require that the kids do it collaboratively, because I think that is another one of the 21st century skills that we assume kids have, but they don't. As teachers, it's one of the things we were quick to say, get in a group, work in a group, talk to your neighbor. And it's like, well, but these are the expectations. And these are, so I think it really gives kids a chance to practice what those collaborative skills look like, and receive feedback on them. But also, so anyway, the project goes to our kids this time, because they do teach at a Catholic school, as you mentioned. So we definitely wanted it to be service oriented. So the extra bit of, one of the constraints they were given as a part of their challenge was, you have to create a product or a service that helps fulfill a need. So whether it's, teen mental health, or, we had one group of guys who I was so impressed with, who they're athletes. And so they were talking about how they noticed, when they go to do some of the, I guess, club and middle school play, like some schools don't have, adequate access for athletes and equipment. So they created a subscription box that like people could donate. And then schools that were less fortunate could get, toiletries shipped out to just the amount of concern. I think the thing that was so beautiful was that, they were absolutely doing a great job with the 3D modeling of their prototypes. They were absolutely doing wonderful things. Bigger kids actually did some coding of their HTML coding of their business websites. Loved all of those things. I think that what I was most impressed with is that within this realm of computer science, so many good things about empathy and, being people for others, and how do we use what we know and what we have and our talents to help other people. So we may not necessarily create 25,000 computer scientists, but if I am a coder and I have the ability to do, X, Y, and Z, how do I use that to help make this part of the world a better place? And I think, with teenage people who tend to sometimes be just a little self-centered, maybe a little bit. It's really beautiful for them to see them, and like I said, with my project-based learning, I'm, there to support with very little teacher, drive. It's what are you passionate about? Yes, we would love, feeding those people that are challenged without having homes. If that's not your passion, you're not going to bring your best. Yes, I would love for you to do that and support the organizations, but tell me how you can use this specific coding skill. How do we use game design? The things that the sixth graders came up with in Minecraft were amazing. Like, we had a kid that did the SEL game.
Wow.
We had a kid that created and it was interesting because I was, somehow I was kind of like, okay, where are we going? But he did a no drip ice cream cone. They built, because I think they want to be on Minecraft. So I said, well, coach will meet you halfway. But to see so his mom, he's a single home from a single parent home. And so the tie-in was, I know how hard it was for my mom. So this is one way for a mom to not have to clean up messes. And I'm like, these are sixth grade boys.
Yeah.
Like, this is not something that, but it came through Minecraft, and it came through the passion came through coding. And like I said, it never would have been realized if it wasn't within that vehicle. You know what I'm saying? I think, if I told them to read an article about and how do we help single parents, the buy-in would not have been the same, but I think as we continue to meet this generation where they need to be met, us as educators have to be open to those kinds of things. Because what I do know is that child will never be the same. And who knows now with this mindset, as a part of his, tool belt, where he will go, and hey, if I can say this, look, somebody came from Coach Hicks and did that, listen. My job will be done. As I joke with him, I will be retiring and coming to I'd say each one of you guys gets a month. I'm not paying any bills. I will come in my little suitcase. I've taught enough children now where
you get a little royalty deal on these Shark Tank projects.
I know. Well, I told him, I said, listen, Coach Hicks gets a percentage of each one. So, but no, I mean, I'm just really, I think whenever my kids have the opportunity to, really show themselves, and I mean, the coding, of course, is all at different levels of ability, some of the takeaway. But I mean, when you really get a chance to see your kid's heart in a project, it's awesome. So yeah, I think it definitely has been a project I've loved, but probably one of my favorites.
Well, I could definitely stay on and listen to all the projects that you've done. They're so infatuating and exciting and thrilling. But I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking with all of us today.
Absolutely.
If you are a guest in our chat right now, go ahead and feel free to drop any questions. And what we'd like to do is list one more poll. In your school, do you have a computer science or STEM program in your school? Yes, no, or somewhat. And so if you'll take a second to fill that out, I believe Kendra's going to put in your contact, Coach Hicks, as well as our contacts in the chat. Feel free to get a hold of us. We would love to continue the conversations with you all. And Coach Hicks, thank you so much for what you're doing with students. And thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Anytime I love to come to talk to fellow teachers. We don't very often, most people, my relatives that are not teachers, like, okay, we really don't want to talk about school. So these webinars are nice. At least I get to talk to other, teacher people never get tired of teacher talk. So
no, we can swap stories for hours.
Well, it's so funny how many times we go to these functions and the first thing teachers will say is, we're not talking about school today.
Right.
And generally the first statement after that is, but did you hear about so
yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, that happened. Let me tell you about this time in my classroom.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure being able to talk to you today. And those of you who have attended, thank you so much for coming today. We hope you have a good evening. And so we'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys, have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.